Okay, so we are live. Welcome to the first installment of Startup Weekly. Today I'm joined by Mr. Dan Schoonmaker. He is the creator and founder of Caster Community, a podcasting community, and he is coming to us live from Austin, Texas. So Dan, thank you very much for taking the time for joining today.
Yeah,
How's
thanks.
everything with you?
It's great. Thanks for having me. It's an honor to be the first guest.
Absolutely, yeah. So we know each other because we've been part of the a community called Yen, I guess, and I've kind of watched your growth over the past couple of months with Caster Community, and it's been really interesting to see, I suppose, just see the growth happen organically and um, the size of the community growing and all of the stuff I've learned from you along the way, I guess, as well. So yeah, I guess I was trying to think about this earlier. I was like, Dan is a software developer by trade as well. So I was kind of thinking like, what kind of mix of skills is there with software development and community building and podcasting, and like where do you see the kind of overlap of all those? But maybe before we jump into that, you can give us like a bit of an overview of Caster Community itself.
Yeah, sure. So I started Caster Community after building a software product, ironically. I kind of did things backwards from how I now think you should build a business. But yeah, so the community itself is a community for podcasters who are many of the members are just getting started with their podcast or are building a tool in the podcasting space, similar to myself.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. So that's a good point as well, because I do know you're building like a couple of different tools around Caster Community, and obviously they all kind of play into the whole area of podcasting, but the community itself seems to be the core hub of what you're doing.
Yeah, so I started with a podcasting network called Clips, where I wanted to make it easier for people to discover podcasts. And then after realizing naively that you can't just launch a product on the internet and people will just discover it naturally. Unfortunately, it doesn't always work that easily, especially when you have a full-time, like if you're not focusing on it full-time and you have a full-time job and can't dedicate, hours and hours to like website growth hacking type things. You have to go out and kind of foster a community around your product. So I was working on Clips for about a year. Again, it's just was a part-time kind of thing I did just as like a hobby, like when I wasn't doing my day job. And after a year of that and only having like, I think 12 or 15 signups, I realized that I needed to kind of take a different approach if I was going to invest this much time in building it. And that's when I decided to join this community building course that Gordon and I both participated in and kind of created this community.
Mm-hmm. So you had I don't know, I guess a small basis or a small group of people that you knew were already interested in it. So it was kind of like a proof of concept in a way, but you just hadn't gone, I guess, into full on community building mode. So I guess since doing that in the past few months, like what have you learned, I guess, from jumping into that more head on, and like you mentioned, you see that as a building block for starting a business and really just bringing in a community around it from the start.
Yeah, I think the biggest benefit is having people there that you can go to and ask for feedback when you're creating a new product, rather than just building something just because you thought it was a cool feature to add to your website. So yeah, I mean, I have like very big ambitions for Clips, and I have like a ton of ideas that I want to build that I think would be cool to build. And again, as a software engineer, a lot of the times for me, it's at least about solving the challenges and kind of creating the tech rather than will the customer actually use this or want to use it. So to build an actual business, though, you need the customer support as well. So where the community came in was it allowed me to bounce ideas off of people and kind of hear firsthand from podcasters what challenges they were facing and what tools they were sort of lacking and could use help with. And then that then changed my focus on what I wanted to build next.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So you're basically thinking about like getting feedback from the community while using that to feed into the types of products you want to build, but also for like prioritizing the kind of products that you want to kind of attach on to what you're building and what you're offering.
Yeah, because essentially my goal is to now create kind of a podcasting ecosystem of tools that all kind of plug into each other, because a big thing with the podcasting space is that there's a lot of like fractured, like the environment is fractured, right? Getting started is kind of difficult because you have to go out and find a hosting provider. You have to figure out how to then a lot of times distribute, like which networks to distribute your show to. And a lot of it is just a manual process. You have to get a microphone, you have to, and then the entire time you're also trying to figure out how to be the host of a podcasting show. You know, a lot of times that involves booking guests and things like that. So there's just like a high barrier to entry when really it should be super simple these days with how easy technology makes it. You know, you could just start a show on YouTube very quickly and kind of ramp up from there. So I want to make podcasting as easy to get into as, you know, something like starting a YouTube show.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's an interesting point because I don't know, it's hard to remember maybe back when like YouTube was gaining popularity if it was the sole player in the video space, and it probably wasn't, and it probably took a while for them to get to a point where it was like the most logical platform for people to begin creating videos on. So yeah, it seems like there's a whole lot of different tools that people can begin with for podcasts, and you're obviously navigating that space while trying to make it easier for other people to get started and do all that.
And today it's so easy for people to, especially with no code tools and things like that, like to create a SaaS product and kind of offer it to customers that, like, the way I view it is rather than paying like $5 to $15 for like 6 different tools to like handle your podcast, like hosting and distribution and editing and, you know, social sharing. I want to eventually try to build kind of all of that into a single tool. And again, that's a super ambitious long-term goal. I still have a day job that, you know, I love and stuff. So it's not like I'm just quitting my job and kind of looking for investors. It's just kind of a hobby that I'm doing in my spare time, while also like I love learning about the podcasting industry and the challenges people are facing. So
yeah, for sure. And you have to start somewhere as well. So
yeah.
absolutely. But yeah, that kind of maybe leads us on to like what we mentioned at the start. So you mentioned you're like a software developer by trade, and have you seen, or like it would be, I was thinking it might be interesting, like have you seen any kind of complementary skill sets, or have you been able to like map certain things you do in software development to what you're doing with podcasting, or like even with community building, is there certain things that you can map across those two or three domains that maybe you wouldn't think there'd be very many correlations between, but maybe you've seen something?
Yeah. So it's funny because I like commonly say that being a entrepreneurial software engineer is like a blessing and a curse, because you have the ability to create kind of almost whatever you want. So staying focused on one single thing is often difficult, because, you know, the new cool thing will come out and you'll randomly build a blockchain thing, or, you know, because you can build something doesn't mean you should kind of shift and do it. So one skill that I've personally taught myself is to try and like pick an industry and just focus on it, which is clearly I've now picked podcasting. As for skills that translate, one thing that I think I kind of took from my day job, just both my current one and my previous job, is just the idea of building a platform of tools that work like really closely together, because
Mm-hmm.
ultimately that's what customers want. They don't want to have 5 to 10 different tools and have to like integrate them with each other, because that's when things get difficult. So I think an advantage I have is that I can kind of build an array of things and make sure that they're all kind of plug and play with one another from
Mm-hmm.
like an integration data standpoint, right?
Yeah,
But
absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, besides that, I mean, as a software engineer, I would say I've learned a ton from community building, because it's so much more like a personal skill, that like more intercommunication skills than, problem solving skills with a computer. Like
Mm-hmm.
I've had to learn how to, convey my thoughts through like written word, right? To like content marketing type stuff to get people to join the community and things like that. So in a way, it's actually kind of complementing my software engineering background, because I'm learning those more interpersonal skills.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Okay. So interesting that you mentioned like the community building part with that, because like it's obviously quite a time consuming task as well. Like you're trying to start a community, you're trying to manage it, you're trying to um, start conversations, you're trying to manage conversations, and then you're also trying to manage the discussion and the people that are in the group itself. So um, I guess for like people who are trying to go down the route of starting their own community, what kind of insights can you give into the, I don't know, like the day-to-day practices or best practices and starting out? Because it's yeah, it's a lot of things to think about, I guess, from a people management perspective.
Yeah. So there's definitely a lot of things, especially early on, that are really kind of intimidating, because you have to try and like build something from scratch, which from like a people standpoint is not easy to do, because with the network effect of communities, no one necessarily wants to join a community where no one belongs yet, because
Mm-hmm.
the value they'll gain is like not uh, equal to the value they necessarily have to give by signing up. So early on, one thing that I did was get some close friends and my girlfriend, and like people that like I now call friendlies when I tell people the strategies, like get friendlies to join the community. So when the time comes that you need to sort of generate a conversation, because again, people want to gain value from your community, and you need to, at least in the beginning, find a way to generate that communication.
Mm-hmm.
So early on, I had a couple of close friends and my girlfriend join. We just literally just would post kind of like a news article and kind of discuss it, or kind of share the podcast that we were listening to at the time. And then that at least gave me kind of a foundation to then share, you know, at least feel comfortable sharing with the external world. Like, I have a community, like you should join it because I think you would, bring value.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So you've now obviously built it to the point where I guess the people that are coming into it are coming into, I suppose, a thriving community of people who are already um, communicating. They're already sharing ideas. They're already sharing um, insights into different applications, different podcasting tools that are like hot off the press and stuff like that. So, um, what does um, what does that look like now compared to like what it did at the start? I'm sure it's much different, but like
Yeah.
it's almost got like a life of its own in a sense.
Yeah, I would say the best feeling in the world is when people start talking to each other and helping each other out without my intervention, like
Mm-hmm.
the founder's intervention, because that is, I think, the turning point of when it turns from like a, I don't know, kind of like feature of the website to an actual full-blown community, because you have those connections that aren't going directly through you as the founder. So I mean, I think don't get me wrong, you say the community is thriving, but at 57 people, like I am still putting in a ton of work to kind of spark conversation.
Yeah, for sure.
There are definitely days when it kind of like someone will post something and a thread will kind of go on, and it's kind of like watching your baby kind of grow up. You feel really honored to kind of see that communication back and forth, but then there's other days when I'm like, talking to my girlfriend, I'm like, hey, can you post something in the community today? So it kind of looks like, because the big thing is keeping it front of mind to the members and being kind of working yourself into their day-to-day routine, because I think ultimately that's what you want is like, people are going to their email, their Twitter, these specific things. And one reason I built my community on Slack is because my idea is being like, if you're in Slack for your current work day job, it's not another kind of barrier to just have another community connected as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I try my best to kind of like mention people, and you have to keep a lot of things in your mind of like, what does each member kind of like and what are they working on? So then you can kind of make those connections of like, when you hear something, mention this person because they're interested in that space. And that's kind of like I said earlier, like those interpersonal skills that I wasn't necessarily great at as a software engineer, a kind of more quiet, introverted software engineer. Learning those things of like the networking side of things is definitely been a fun thing to learn up on.
It's amazing to see like different communities that like people might be part of online, and they do obviously naturally get to a certain point or scale where they do begin to like become thriving communities without a huge amount of intervention needed on behalf of the founder or whatever. But like you mentioned, there's a huge amount of work that goes in up front to get to that point. So it's cool that you're on that journey, I guess, at the moment. And then it's also cool to see it growing in real time. But I guess I just wanted to lead on and ask them, like, does that come up with its own issues along the way with regards to growth, or I guess from a moderation standpoint with certain people? I guess you want to foster, I guess, a conversation around a certain topic, but you also, like you said, want to keep it top of mind for the user. And I guess when people are coming in with all their own ideas or podcasts themselves, I guess it's kind of like a fine line for you to manage as a moderator and as a founder.
Yeah, I think really early on, I wanted to make sure the first couple members were, again, like a solid foundation. Like I kind of created the optimal member that I could think of. And I kind of went out and reached out to them personally, one-on-one through Twitter or like indiehackers.com, and made sure, like basically tried to get them in first, because my thought being that if you create like a certain type of persona within the community, then they would kind of invite people, and they would it kind of exponentially grows from there, hopefully, as they draw people in. As far as concerns go, I mean, I can't even explain to you how like hesitant I always am to like post the community on something like Reddit, because I don't want, a bunch of people who are just going to come in, join and spam like their podcast show or their tool that they're building, and kind of like the one thing you don't want, I think, is other people making the experience worse for your like base kind of super fan members, community members. So yeah, as it grows, I've definitely been, I've kept a close eye on how much people kind of shamefully plug their tools and stuff like that. Not that like we surprisingly have had a great, with 57 to 60 people, like we've had a great amount of people who, like, everyone so far has been very generous with supporting each other versus like just kind of spamming their own stuff. So luckily at this point, I think it's been good, but that's also the reason for the kind of slow and steady growth that I've been pushing is because I don't want to, I don't want to grow just for growth's sake, right?
Yeah.
I'm not like trying to monetize this group right now. Like, I just want the nice feedback from people I trust that have a similar mindset as myself.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, like something I just thought of is like, I've also tried to put in effort to try to create a somewhat diverse member group, right? Because I don't want all podcast tool builders. I don't want all podcasters. Like, I wanted to get a nice mix of like, men and women, because early on, like a lot of, besides my girlfriend, I would say 100% of the first 40 members were probably men.
Mm-hmm.
And then it kind of created a thing where, you're just getting like less diverse feedback because you're all kind of very similar, which is something that I then kind of focused on.
Cool.
Going on podcasts where I could attract different types of audiences.
Yeah. So as you've kind of gone through that growth progression, I guess, I know that you've kind of touched on it a little bit already, but have you seen or have you experimented with different methods of getting people to join that you thought maybe worked really well, or that things that you thought wouldn't work and then they did work? You mentioned like trying to create a customer persona, which is probably a great exercise to do for anyone who's trying to start a business or recruit users. So was there anything else that like you kind of thought, oh, I'm not sure about that, or it actually did work out better than you thought?
Yeah. So the number one thing, which I'm kind of glad I did this now because before this call, was that on Monday I sent out a newsletter to a fairly small newsletter, like subscription list that I have. And just from that, so I was kind of putting it off because I wasn't really sure what I wanted to put in the newsletter, I guess. And so I sent that out on Monday, and I immediately had like 3 new members join. So that's definitely something that I both want to use as a way to get those, 40 or so people on my mailing list that aren't in the community to kind of at least consider. And then also as a way to draw like members who are a little less active, kind of remind them that about the community, so they'll come back and kind of create conversation. But the main approach I would say that got most of the members to join was creating this resource list that I call Caster Kit. It's a list of, well, now it's a website. Originally, it was a list of podcasting resources and tools that people who are just getting started podcasting and kind of confused at where to start could kind of reference on, these are common mics that podcasters would purchase, or these are, the hosting services that are the most well-known. And on that, I kind of, put a button on the top and bottom of like, join the community to kind of learn more and get in the conversation of like what tools people are using. So I would say probably 80% of the members came through that, or, similar like content posts that I put out about the community.
Mm-hmm. So you essentially created value up front by creating like a directory of curated tools for podcasters, and then that was the route for them to find their way to the caster community.
Yeah. I mean, I think providing value before asking, like, again, I just put it out there with a button that says, hey, if you want to join my community, you can do this. So providing that value is definitely, it also makes me feel more comfortable as like a salesman, kind of like, I feel more comfortable asking them to join the community because I had already put in all the time to provide that value in the first place.
Absolutely. So for people looking to start a community from scratch, like you've touched on a couple of the tips there, but is there like, what would be like the number one thing for someone who wants to just get started and just wants to build a community around their passion or their niche or whatever they're interested in? What would your number one insight be?
Yeah, It's so I definitely think the number one thing. So yeah, just pick your category niche that you want to kind of build around, and then I think at least the most valuable starting point that I can like give off is just get some people who are also interested in that and just get them to join, and then just you naturally talk to each other about the topic within an ecosystem like I use Slack, or you can use Discord. Like there's tons of community tools out there, which is a nice thing. And that's where I think being a software engineer doesn't have a ton of impact, because now there's so many tools available for community builders that I didn't have to do a ton to, like, there's no skill I had that someone else couldn't do as well. So yeah, just creating that initial community, I definitely think is the hard part in the beginning. Is you have to have a welcoming place for people to join, and no one's going to join a community of just you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's solid. Like, you want to foster an organic, good foundation of people and conversation that are going to welcome in anyone else who's interested in the same topics and the same niches, I guess,
Yeah. And not to plug podcasting, but I think the reason why a lot of podcasts have good communities around them is because podcasts naturally, a lot of times, if they're, something like this, it's a conversation between two people, and the listener kind of already feels a part of that conversation. It kind of feels like you're just sitting there listening in on this, like two friends talking. And I think that's why podcasting and communities work so well together. Like, so a lot of podcasts have a lot of good communities, like Facebook groups and stuff, because people who listen to the show regularly feel connected to the hosts, and they want to join in on the conversation, because podcasting is such a, one-to-one cut off conversation, that then building the community around it is like a way for the listener to join in.
Absolutely. Yeah. So what about the future of podcasting as a whole? Like, you're obviously immersed in the whole space yourself. You've been building a community. You are building tools for podcasters and for podcasting. What do you see kind of on a long-term trajectory with podcasting, and comparing it to, I don't know, video and even writing as well? I think like there's all these different mediums for expression and for people to create, and I think they're all going to grow, I think, obviously, but how do you see kind of podcasting in the whole space of it all?
Yeah, so the reason podcasting excites me is because I think audio is the one medium that is kind of neglected right now on the internet. And don't get me wrong, like podcasting is definitely growing exponentially, but if you think about it, so video, like these days, everyone has Bluetooth headphones. Like a lot of people are passively listening to music as they work, or audio as they drive, things like that. So that's where I think audio has a benefit over video, is because you can passively consume it. Whereas like video, I have a hard time watching a YouTube video while I work, because I'm like constantly looking over at it and kind of like getting distracted. Whereas audio, you don't really have to consume 100% of what you're listening to kind of get the gist of it. So the thing I like about audio is that you can passively kind of consume it. And on the other end, the way it kind of competes with writing is that I think a lot of people, myself included, have a hard time sitting down and just writing content. Whereas like sitting down and just talking is, at least in my mind, like a natural human kind of way to express yourself. So from a creator standpoint, creating a podcast for a lot of people is even easier than sitting down and writing, because it's more informal, I guess. Like you're not constantly like going back and editing and changing your stuff. You just kind of share your thoughts and opinions. And from the creation standpoint against video, like video, you are kind of like caring what you look like and like how your kind of facial expressions and things like that. Whereas audio only, you don't have to worry about any of that. You can just sit down in your pajamas and kind of talk and record a podcast with like very little like setup beforehand. I mean, my first podcast episode, I stood there talking into my phone and kind of just recording, and it came out as good, if not better, than the ones when I had a microphone. So yeah, I think I'm very excited about the future of podcasting. I just think our day-to-day kind of consumer behaviors have to catch up at this point. And things like the Amazon Echo, Alexa, hopefully it doesn't turn on.
She's listening.
Yeah. I think those, there she is.
There she is.
Those voice connected devices are also another thing, right? Like any futuristic movie you see, their entire house is kind of talking to them and listening. So I think once that becomes more ingrained in our day-to-day of listening to audio and kind of communicating with a voice assistant, it's just going to explode even more. So
yeah, it's interesting how you mentioned it is such a natural way to communicate, I guess, with just sitting down and chatting to someone. And I guess from a marketing or content creation standpoint, then it opens up the door to be able to create other media from a simple conversation as well. Like you said, if you were to sit down and write an article, it could take you an hour or two, and then all you've got is the article at the end of it. But if you, let's say, record a podcast, you can split it up into your article. You can split it like into a video if you have a video to go along with it. You could create a series of tweets to go along with it as well to break down. So I guess it's almost like a very efficient way to create like a large pillar piece of content and then break that down into a lot smaller chunks that can be distributed elsewhere as well.
Yeah.
And sorry, to come full circle then, it's like coming back to the tools that you're probably trying to build and trying to prioritize, okay, how can you capture value from obviously the macro trend that's going on with podcasting, but thinking about how does this play into content creators and the kind of tools that they're going to want to leverage for distribution of content across different media, social media.
Yeah, the entire like thesis behind creating clips is that I want to make it super easy for someone to cut out an audio clip of their favorite segment of a podcast episode and easily distribute it to social networks and things like that. But yes, like you said, transcription is the next thing I think I'm like really big on, is being able to quickly transcribe your episode. And again, all of these services kind of exist. It's not like I'm inventing them. It's more that I want to make them work closely together. So you're not, going out separately and paying for a transcription service when you can just, as you listen to an episode, kind of see the transcription.
Yeah. And you've obviously got that skill set to be able to leverage your technical skills to like pair that with your interest in podcasting, but also being able to bridge that gap for people who are content creators that aren't technical and they're looking for these kind of tools to be able to distribute that content. It's very cool. It's a great position to be in.
It's an exciting time and an exciting industry. And I have a hard time sleeping at night. I'm so excited about the things going on.
Yeah, awesome. So I think that kind of brings us like full circle back to like the stuff that you're working on day to day then. It's interesting to see or think about, for me, like when you mention transcription and all that, when you think about, I don't know, are you trying to leverage like artificial intelligence or machine learning? Do they play into the tools that you're building for transcribing all of that audio into text? And like, do you have a technical knowledge with machine learning and AI to be able to do that on your side?
So not like super deep, but I am using machine learning. So right now I'm kind of transcribing the shorter clips, mostly just from a financial standpoint. It's cheaper than transcribing an entire episode when some podcast episodes can get up to 3 hours long. But from a machine learning standpoint, I am right now starting to do like extracting the topics out of an episode and kind of doing that automatically rather than having people submit what categories their podcast is about. So then you can get more fine-grained kind of details on what the conversation's on, rather than a high level, like this is a business genre or comedy. You know, it can be like, this is comedy about dogs, things like that. So then that all goes back to the discovery problem of how do I make it easier for people to discover content that they may not have known about previously.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think discovery is like a really, well, it's obviously an important aspect for creators because they want to get their stuff out there. But even from a community perspective, like places like Indie Hackers and like when you're trying to discover other people and other projects, getting like discovery mechanisms on different community platforms is really helpful for people who want to, or people who are seeking out content and seeking out creators as well. So yeah, it's definitely interesting to think about different ways to integrate those. So yeah, absolutely.
And an interesting thing we're seeing with social networks is like originally social networks kind of changed it so you only kind of heard about things you were directly interested in. And then you kind of got in this bubble where you didn't hear kind of diverse views and things like that. So yeah, discovery in general and like everyone evolves as a person, right? Like what I liked 10 years ago on Facebook, I may not be interested in as much now. So yeah, discovery in general, that's why I regularly just call Clips a discovery service, even though, you know, right now it's lacking some very common discovery tools, but it's really just because I think that is the challenge that I want to solve. And the ultimate goal is to make it so people are discovering content that, you know, they like.
Yeah, for sure. So maybe just to conclude then, what's next for Caster Community and Clips, and for the immediate future, what are the kind of the main targets or goals?
So for the community, again, creating that self-sustaining ecosystem of like people helping each other out without as much direct intervention from me is definitely like a near-term goal. A longer-term goal, I would like to, you know, work community and social features more into the Clips product. So it's, you know, people are recommending things and creating shared playlists of episodes they like and are able to quickly share it with other people. Rather than just, you know, saying I like this podcast episode. So those are like kind of near term goals I have. Longer term goals, again, with Clips specifically, it's really just to create more of an ecosystem of like for podcasters, kind of tools that support their creation of podcast episodes, and of course the distribution of those episodes once they create it.
Awesome. Well, it sounds like you have a nice backlog of things that you want to be working on. So you'll definitely be kept busy for the near term. Look, I just want to thank you very much, Dan, for taking the time to kind of dive into podcasting and community building. It was great to get your insights on everything that you've learned so far. So yeah, thank you very much for having the chat.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
No worries, my man. Okay, cool. Chat to you later. Have a good one.
Yep. You too. Bye.